So there we are, 2 weeks before the show, and we just get our cast set. We finally got our final two performers were Morgan and Brandon came in as our two murderers. And Brandon was also one of the king's sons, was the younger son, Donalbain. But it's not fun to be directing a show and be maybe 10 days away, 2 weeks away from opening, when you've got two characters who also have major fight choreography to learn, and the people you cast keep disappearing. So you could say that about It's the Scottish play, but when we directed Midsummer, we lost one of our leading ladies 5 days before we opened, so you couldn't say, oh, well, ooh, it's Midsummer. And with Romeo and Juliet, our final dress rehearsal, our Romeo took a chain to the face during a fight and ended up in the hospital momentarily, only in the emergency room, but still, nobody turned around and said, oh, it's Romeo and Juliet. No, it's theater. It just happens. Stuff happens. Yeah, during Macbeth, I kind of broke my wrist. And yeah, then there was the head that we were having made for Joel. Oh, the head. The head was an experience. We were really fortunate to have an artisan who had constructed heads for other Shakespeare shows. And we approached him and said, look, if we get you the materials, will you construct a head for us? And he said, sure, I can do that. That's no problem. Joel went into the city, sat for hours with the plaster mold on his face, and it came to the point weeks later when the head was ready, and he called up Joel and said the head was gone. Contractors working in his apartment had apparently, I guess it was in a box, it got thrown away, which was disconcerting since this guy was then on his way to his honeymoon and off to Italy and not able to make us another head. Now, I've made props in the past. I grew up making props, actually, with my mother in community theater. So I've got some experience. And I'd never made a full head before. And I just sort of looked at the materials and looked at the directions, which our artisan, Timmer, was kind enough to do for us. And I said, okay, we got to have a head. So Joel sat again for the hours it took for the cast. And I learned a few things about making cast moldings and using dragon skin and expandable foam products that I really didn't think I'd ever have to learn. But we ended up with a pretty wicked looking head. There were a few, minor problems with it, but you slap some mud, look, some brown paint for mud and the blood on there. It was great. It's there for a moment. You can film it, but you're never ever going to get that feeling of what it was like to sit there in that darkened theater with those performers. You'll never get that feeling on tape. You can only get it by sitting there and being a part of it. That's the real magic of live theater, because it happens in the moment and then it's gone. And what happens one night in a show will never happen again the same night or the next night. It will never be exactly the same. In professional theaters, they try to make it that. For us, we want it to be different. We want it to grow with each performance. We want it to grow with each moment. We never want to set our show. We always want the actors to be trying something new, trying something more. And I even try to instigate that as a director. After my first weekend, I will usually go up to my performers and I'll whisper something into their ear that says, "Did you think of that?" And all of a sudden they'll be, "What?" I love that. It's my little way of saying, "You thought you knew this part, didn't you? Well, try that." And invariably, sometimes it gets me a little bit of, people don't always like it, but what ends up on stage, it's just another facet for a performance. It's just a little bit more life out there that happens and makes it just that closer to truth, or just that closer to the story, and makes it all that much more alive. And that's what really makes a difference about working in a production like this. You're constantly growing. You're open to change, and the actor's input is much more welcome than it would be in, say, in a different venue. And we're just so fortunate to have so many well-trained and experienced people, and people who've never done it before. We got a couple of folks in our cast, never been on stage, never had a major role, and they love it. It's the most wonderful way to learn this craft, is to do it. And the best thing to do is to do the best, which is why you do Shakespeare. It's been such an incredible experience. You go through so much, and you make yourself crazy, and you don't sleep, and you go 24/7, and Tech Week comes around, and there's all these things that, oh, if we had done that, or never had time to get around to this, and oh, that's not the way I thought it was going to be, but that's pretty good anyway. Comes around, and you get a show like this up, and you get the reactions that you get from your audience. People coming up and saying, wow, I never thought I understood Shakespeare, but I knew exactly what was going on. And gee, I wasn't sure what the word meant, but I know what they were doing. I followed the story. A dear friend of mine comes up, and all the time, every show I do with Shakespeare, she says, I don't like Shakespeare, but I do like yours every time I come to see. And I'm just like, no, you do like Shakespeare. We get this thing into our head when we get to English class. Blah, Shakespeare. No. You see it. You see it done honestly, with energy and vitality. Shakespeare speaks to everybody. And we happy few who get to actually do it and pull the sacrifices off and get out there and put it in front of an audience, including an audience of middle schoolers and high schoolers who may never ever see Shakespeare again, haven't seen it before, and their eyes get wide, and they're touched, and they're moved. And that's what you do it for, to reach out to your audience members, to touch them, to move them. And we were so lucky. We were so lucky to be able to do this, to be able to have this time together as a cast and to get it out there in front of an audience. And then it's over. And you go on with your lives. But like the fog machine, like the smoke, there's always those leftover wisps of smoke. There's always that leftover little drop of blood that you can't get out of the costumes or off the floor. And there's always something left. With live theater, it leaves the legacy of memory, of the remembrance of what it was, of that experience. And we have all walked away with some fabulous memories, absolutely fabulous memories. And for everything it took, it was certainly worth it.